Oh my god, it's literally been forever since I last made one of these. Okay, so I'm back after about 6, 7, 8 months since my last video. But essentially I used to make book videos quite regularly. I think I did like one a week, something like that. But essentially I moved to university. Actually before that I got a job, and I just like cut down on reading so much. Like I just didn't have the time for it, and so then I couldn't make any videos because I had nothing to talk about because I hadn't read much. I am back now. I'm today going to be doing my yearly reading wrap up, because it was actually a year ago today that I started reading. I was going to say I read my first book, but that's obviously a lie. I've obviously read a book before, but I read my first book on my kind of reading journey and started reading, you know, consistently. I think I have 34 books to talk about, so it's going to be a long one. Okay, so really quickly, the first book I want to talk about is Noughts and Crosses by Mallory Blackman. Now this is a book I never see it on BookTok, I never see it on BookTube, I don't really see people talking about it. But this is the first book that I read which kicked off my reading journey. The reason I read it was I had been watching a lot of booktubers and I wanted to get back into reading, but I used to be really bad for like starting books and not finishing them. Like I just could not read a book, so I was like, this one was in my house, so I was like, if I get through this book then I'll allow myself to go and buy some. Okay, so this book is essentially kind of an alternate reality where there is noughts and crosses and they're kind of opposed to each other. Our two main characters, Sephy and Callum, they were basically childhood friends and over the years kind of formed a close bond and they grow into a romantic relationship. So Callum is a knot and Sephy is a cross. It's kind of hard to explain, but essentially the crosses look down on the knots. So it's kind of almost like a Romeo and Juliet kind of story, that kind of vibe. It has some kind of more dark themes, but overall it's a really good book. I genuinely enjoyed it and I can't say anything badly on it from that front because it's what got me into reading. However, it is part of a series which I didn't continue on to because it was just something about the writing style, I think, that I don't know, I kind of found some of the words a bit cringe and it was just kind of like, it wasn't really for me. I didn't continue on with this series, however that was just purely a personal preference. I would still recommend this book. At the time of reading I gave this 3 stars, so overall solid book. So the next book I'm going to talk about is The Inheritance Games. Now if you were kind of aware of BookTok, BookTube maybe like a year and a half to like 2 years ago, any of that kind of period, you will have heard of this book. It's essentially a kind of mystery and it has a bit of a kind of Knives Out feel to it. Essentially, Avery gets invited to a will reading of this man who is a billionaire and he leaves his entire fortune pretty much to her. She is not aware of any relation to him, like it's very confusing and basically they're all trying to figure out what is the reason for her getting left this money. There is a subplot of romance. It's kind of got a wee love triangle between some of the brothers in this family. And overall it's a really, really good book. The chapters are really short, which for me when I was getting into reading was so important because it meant I could keep my attention span up and like really get into the books. Overall I gave this book 4 stars, I believe. This one honestly was one of the books that really, really did get me into reading. I don't know if without this book if I would have been able to get so in love with reading. If you're just getting into your reading journey, I definitely recommend this book. Next up, I read Daisy Jones and the Six. Now, I read this just around the time of the TV show coming out. I love that TV show. I show it to everyone. I make all my friends watch it. I made my whole family watch it. I tried to get my whole family to read this book. However, my family are not big readers, so I don't know how far into it they got. But essentially, it is a story about this band in like the 70s kind of era. It's so good. It's kind of like their interviews talking about their time in the band. This was my first 5-star book. This was the first book that I gave 5 stars and I stand by that rating. I would read this about 100 times over. I think I literally read it on a flight from Dublin. I'd like travel to Dublin for the weekend and I read it pretty much at the airport and on the flight. I read it so fast because it was just so good. This is one of those books that I genuinely would recommend to everyone to read. I think it's hard not to love. Obviously some people might not like it, but I find it to be one of those books generally everyone's gonna like. They're gonna like some aspect of it. Okay, I just had to move a little bit there because my legs were getting very uncomfortable in the position I was sitting in. But the next book that I went on to read was the second book in the Inheritance Game series, The Hawthorne Legacy. I also loved this book. This was another one that I'm pretty sure I read it in like a day. I just sat outside and I just flew through this book. Also, it's really floppy, which some people might appreciate that. I love a good floppy book. I gave this one 4 stars. I can't really give too much away about the storyline because obviously it's part of a series. You kind of need the context, but if you get into the series, you'll definitely love this book. It has more kind of like mystery aspects to it and like puzzles and things. So it's a really fun read. Next I read It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. Now I actually really like Tessa Bailey books. I want to read more. I've only read 2, I think, this one and the sequel in this series. But essentially it is about Piper, who she's basically like an influencer, kind of Ellie type of girl. She gets sent to this kind of small town where her dad was from. She opens up this like kind of bar with her sister, which is kind of like a project for her because she's been cut off. Anyway, she meets this man Brendan, and it's very much like, I hate to use like trope names, but it's very much grumpy ex Sunshine. You can even see like from the cover, he looks grumpy, he is, but we love him. They're just so oh, I can't even explain. I love this book so much. There is a bit of spice to it, so if you're not into that, I wouldn't recommend it. But apart from that, chef's kiss, love. I gave it 4 stars, I think, maybe 4.5. No, it was 4 stars. Okay, the next book I read was One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is by the same author of Daisy Jones and the Six. Now this book I never actually picked for myself. This was a book that my sister got me for my birthday last year. I loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. It's basically about this woman who I believe she was engaged to a man. He went away on a trip. Either his plane or his helicopter went missing. But anyway, years later she's had to move on. She's in a relationship and suddenly the man comes back. He gets found. And now she kind of has to work through her emotions and kind of choose between the 2 men. Like, does she want to go back to her first husband or does she want to stick with her fiance? This was the first book to genuinely make me cry. Like, I sobbed at this book, which, I don't know, to me, I guess I am kind of an emotional person, but I just never thought I could like cry at a book. But this one did it for me. I don't know if I hear people talking about this too much. There is a movie on it, which the movie, it wasn't the best, it wasn't the worst, but this is honestly a book I would recommend. I don't hear people talk about it that much, but if you ever come across it in a bookshop, I would think about picking it up because I love this book. Okay, well, next up is the third and I guess final of the main series. They do now have the next installment, which is Brothers Hawthorne, I believe, but it's not part of the same kind of trilogy. This is The Final Gambit. Honestly, I loved this one. I'm obviously not going to go into the plot, as I was saying before, it's part of a series, so I don't want to like spoil anything. This was my favourite of the 3. I think people usually prefer the Hawthorne Legacy, but this one did it for me. This was my favourite. I honestly, I kind of want to reread all these books again, but I do kind of want to reread this series at one point. Actually, what I really want to do is, I love these covers, right? I feel like they look really cool on a bookshelf, but I kind of do really like, I think it was the US covers originally, but they've started selling them over here. So I kind of, maybe I'll get them one day. I don't know. Okay, next up is And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. This was my first kind of classic book that I read. This is one that I literally read in a day. Obviously it's not that long. I think it's like roughly 250 pages long, so it's not a crazy thing to read this in a day. But I just got so like hooked on it. I got so invested. It's essentially about these 10 people that go to an island, I believe it is. They go to an island and they're all staying in this house, and kind of one by one they start dropping dead, and it's kind of like a murder mystery. I personally, I'm really bad with reading mysteries and I never get the plot. I would be guessing the most random things. I'm like, oh, it was this guy. I'm never right. And I wasn't right for this one. It was completely, yeah, I just didn't see it coming. I gave this 4 stars, I believe. I remember when I was reading it, because it was my first like classic book, I was a bit skeptical with kind of the writing because I don't know, I wasn't used to that kind of way of speaking, but after like a few chapters I kind of didn't notice it anymore and I just kind of got in the flow of it. So if you're intimidated by reading older novels, I would recommend this. Okay, next up is really the one, the only, A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J Maas. It would not be a reading wrap-up on BookTube without this book. It just wouldn't. I can't even describe how like popular these books are. Like I assure you there's nobody sitting here going like, what is ACOTAR? Everyone knows ACOTAR. I'm obsessed with ACOTAR. This was like one of the first books, apart from One True Loves, this was one of the first books to actually get like a visceral reaction out of me. I remember I was like sat up on my bed reading it and I like giggled and I was like, oh. I was like genuinely like, what am I doing? But if you're one of those people who I doubt exist that don't know what ACOTAR is, it is essentially a fantasy romance set in Prydian, which is kind of like a fae realm. This girl, Farrrr, it's kind of like Beauty and the Beast. She basically gets taken by Tamlin, who'll be the beast in this situation, and she has to live with him after she kills a fae. They kind of have, you know, a romance ensues. There is drama, there is just I can't even explain how much I love this book. But I think a lot of people kind of talk down on the first book, ACOTAR, but I remember loving it. I think if the book had carried on the way it was kind of, the direction it was going in the first book, I would have still loved the whole series, even though it did end up taking a different direction. Okay, next up is The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. I have to say, this is one of those books that I genuinely like bring up to my friends quite a lot. Half from loving it so much, half kind of making fun of a certain scene. It was a spicy scene, which I always bring up to my friends because I found it really, really funny. If you know, you know. But aside from that, I loved this book. It's kind of like a fake dating kind of trope, and also like she thinks he hates her but he actually doesn't hate her. I think I'm a sucker for that trope, to be honest. Like that got me. And it's kind of set in a university. She's a PhD student, I believe, and he's a professor. Ali Hazelwood books, I think the way they're written, because she is like a science, I'm not sure what she does specifically, but she is like a scientist of some sort. So all her books are kind of set in like a scientific setting. So obviously, as I was saying, she's a PhD student. So she kind of speaks as if she does know what she's talking about, she's a scientist. But, you know, it kind of comes, I don't know how to describe it. It just comes across really well, like really well thought out, well planned out. I really don't know how to describe it. So I gave it 4 stars. I would have to say it's not like a life-changing book. Like, you're not going to read this book and come away from it like, oh my god, this is the best literary experience ever. Like, no, it's a fun little romance. But like, if you're looking for a fun little romance, like, this is it. Like, this is kind of all you really need. I read this obviously straight after ACOTAR, so it was kind of just like refreshing. It was like a refreshing, fun little read. So for that reason, I would very much recommend. Okay, after that, I did read A Court of Mist and Fury. This book, life-changing. I mean, not literally, but life-changing. I can't even describe how much I love this book. The romance in this book, I am obsessed with. I think about it, honestly, probably at least once a week. Like, I think about these characters so often. I always have it sat on my shelf, and sometimes I'll just look up at my bookshelf and I'm like, I would give anything to just like reread these books, which I know like I can reread them, but I have so many other books I need to read, and obviously ACOTAR's a hefty series. Like, I'm not going to read it in like a couple days, so I'll probably have to leave it like a year or something, and then I'll probably reread it. I keep trying to get my friends and people to read them, but I don't know. It's just, it doesn't seem to be working. I need someone to read it close to me so that I can like relive it while they tell me things that are happening in the series. But this one I gave 5 stars. I loved this book. It wasn't my favourite in the series, and I'll get onto that a little bit later, but very, very good. Okay, next up I read Beach Read by Emily Henry. This was my first Emily Henry book, and for me, honestly now, Emily Henry is just one of my favourite authors. Like, if Emily Henry comes out with a book, it immediately goes on my like TBR. Like, I I will get around to reading that book, you know. But essentially it is about January and Gus, who are both authors, and they're staying in, I believe it's a lake house, not like one lake house, they both have houses next to each other, and they both got writer's block, and they come up with a kind of bet to switch genres. She does romance and he does like literary fiction, so they switch genres. I read this at the start of summer and it just fit the vibe of that perfectly. Like it was starting to get warm when I read this, and I'm a sucker for a book that just like fits the season. I don't know why, I can't explain it, but it just makes the experience so much better. But yeah, it is just a fun little romance. Emily Henry books, like, she is one of those authors that for like a romance book, it is a go-to, and it's also one of the books that I would totally recommend to people. I gave this 5 stars, I believe, which, like, for a romance book, I don't know, I feel like sometimes in my head I feel like I'm kind of like picky with giving books 5 stars, especially romance books, but also I feel like I totally give loads of books 5 stars. Like, I feel like throughout this video I'll be going like, this one's 5 stars, this one's 5 stars, but it is a 5-star book for me. Just 2 seconds ago I was saying like I'm picky about 5 stars. My next book is also a 5 stars. This is the 3rd book in the ACOTAR series, A Court of Wings and Ruin. This, honestly, this book was probably a 6 stars for me, and I think I don't know if I actually wrote it in my Goodreads review, but I definitely thought it. I do prefer this book over A Court of Mist and Fury, which I feel like is kind of an unpopular opinion. Like, some people don't like this book because it is very like politics heavy, but for me, I really enjoyed that because I like that aspect of like fantasy books. I enjoy the kind of politics side of it and like the plotting, like I really do enjoy that. But it also had a lot of the same kind of romance, and by this point we're invested in all of the characters. So I don't know, for me I feel like it was just kind of like a perfect mix of like my favourite aspects of fantasy books. So for me this was my favourite in the ACOTAR series. I can't say too much because obviously it is part of the series, can't be giving away spoilers or anything, but I truly love this book. I'm kind of interested to hear like what other people think of these books. I feel like I only ever hear people saying that A Court of Mist and Fury is their favourite, but I don't know. Court of Wings and Ruin did it for me. Okay, this next book, I genuinely don't have too much to say about it because I feel like there isn't too much to say about it. This is A Court of Frost and Starlight. This is the next book in the ACOTAR series. It's literally just a wee novella. It kind of splits up the series between these 3, which are like kind of one aspect of the story. They're kind of following farrrr, and then this one kind of just marks the turn between that side of the series and then this book. But it's basically like a Christmas special. Like, it was good, it was fun, it wasn't life-changing. I think I gave it like 3 stars. I don't have much to say about it, to be honest. It was fine. Okay, next up, I think we're actually getting onto the ones that I didn't really talk about in videos. Like, these books that I'm about to speak about did show up in my videos last year, but I never actually got... I remember saying in one of my videos, I was like, oh yeah, I'll speak more about it in my like June reading wrap-up, and that video never got made. So I'll be speaking about it now in my yearly reading wrap-up. This is The Last Thing He Told Me. It is a thriller about a woman whose husband like disappears. She's left with his daughter, and they're kind of just like looking into his disappearance. They kind of uncover things about like his identity, and it is a really gripping story. I read this in my 24-hour reading challenge, which that video, it was an experience. It was truly an experience reading for 24 hours straight. But this helped me through that video because I feel like it was a really easy read. It was gripping. It was one that I was able to just like read and read and read. You know, I was never bored. I wasn't trying to like make excuses to not read it. Like, it was easy to just like fly through this book. I probably read it in like 4 or 5 hours, and it held my attention the whole time. It was, I hate this expression, but it was very much like a page turner. Like, I just kind of wanted to keep going to see what would happen. I actually gave this 5 stars. I don't know what I was talking about before when I was saying that I'm picky with books that I give 5 stars to, because literally like 4 of the last 3 books I gave 5 stars. So maybe this was just a good reading month for me. Maybe at this time of the year I was just really getting some good reads. I don't know, but clearly I'm not that picky. Okay, next up we have Better Than the Movies by Lynn Painter. This is a young adult or like I guess like kind of, yeah, young adult romance. It is one that was on my radar. I remember like I was always looking for it in like bookshops at the time. I don't know, I just like very much was so excited to read this book, and I finally found it in my local Waterstones, picked it up, read it in my 24-hour reading video, and it was really good. I really enjoyed it. I think sometimes the characters would kind of cringe me out a bit, and it would kind of make it a bit less enjoyable from that aspect of things. However, I did still give it 4 stars. I would totally recommend. I actually want to read more of her books, just kind of to see if like this style of writing and kind of young adult romance, I guess, like is something that I like, if that's, you know, if that is enjoyable for me, because I don't know. I remember finishing this book and being like, it was really good, gave it 4 stars, but then I was also just like not quite sure about it. Maybe I had like higher expectations and they just weren't met, but that's nothing against the book. Like I would totally recommend this book to people if you're just looking like for a fun little cute romance. Like this is that. Okay, next up I read Book Lovers. This is another Emily Henry book. As I was saying before, I just am obsessed with Emily Henry. This is about Nora and Charlie, who basically, she is a literary agent and he's an editor, and they meet at the start of the book and they kind of had like a bad interaction. It was like a business interaction, but it wasn't good anyway. Nora's sister essentially sends her off to spend a summer in, I think it was a cottage if I remember correctly, and it's in the town where Charlie lives. They keep bumping into each other, they don't like each other at the start, but as it is an Emily Henry book, it obviously develops into romance. It was really, really super fun. I gave it 4 stars. It's honestly, it is a really, really good romance. Like I think I've fallen out of reading romances, which I want to get back into reading them, but if you're looking for a romance, I would recommend. Okay, next up I have Malibu Rising by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I have to say, this book was kind of disappointing for me. Like, I wouldn't go as far to like be like, no, don't read this book. Like, it was good. I gave it 3 stars, but I don't know if it was because I was doing the 24-hour reading challenge and I was maybe just getting sick of reading. I didn't enjoy this book all that much. Like, I remember as well, I was really excited to read this book. Like, I was kind of expecting this to be like a 5-star read for me, but I don't know, it just wasn't that for me. But essentially, it's kind of about the events unfolding at this party, and I believe it's 1983. Nina Riva, who is Mick Riva's daughter, which if you're into the whole Taylor Jenkins Reid universe, you will know who Mick Riva is and why we hate him. But it's about his kids basically. They're throwing a party and kind of the events that unfold throughout the night leading to the end event, which I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but it's a good book, it's fine. It wasn't my favourite, that's all I have to say about it. Okay, so next we have Hook, Line and Sinker. This is the second book by Tessa Bailey. It was connected to this book here. I nearly just knocked down a huge pile of books trying to grab that from the bottom, but it's fine. Anyway, this book is following on from Piper's sister, Hannah, and Brendan's friend and kind of like shipmate, Fox. It's like the love story between these two basically. I love this book. I can't remember too much now about my preference, but I believe I liked this one better than this one. I gave them the same rating, so I don't think there was that much in it, but I think this is a great series, especially like around summertime to read them. Also look very pretty on your shelf, which I'm a sucker for books that like look nice on my shelf. But I would totally recommend this series, especially now that we're getting up to summer. Like, I feel like this will be a good time to invest in these books. Okay, so this next book, I have a lot to say about it. That book is A Court of Silver Flames. I hate it. I don't hate it, but I hate it. It took me 2 months to read. This put me in the biggest reading slump ever. Like, if you watched my videos at the time and I was doing like monthly reading wrap-ups, I would read like 5 to 8-ish books a month. 2 months to read this one book. It was so slow. It like dragged on so much. Like half the book, I swear this much, was just Nesta, who is Feyre's sister for the rest of the series, training and getting with this guy, you know, her love interest, and trying to climb a flight of stairs, and it just dragged on so much. I know a lot of people love this book. I'm not one of them. I'm really not. And if I was to do a reread of the series, this book would not get included in that, because I felt like I was in hell. Like, all the action kind of happens in the last, like, 100 pages, roughly. Which, for a nearly 800 page book, that's not okay. I'm not here for that. I can't do that. So I gave this 3.5 stars because I enjoyed it, but also I didn't. I remember reading it and I was like, yeah, this is good, like I'm getting into this, but then also the thought of reading it just made me be like, no, I don't want to. So yeah, I gave it 3.5 stars. Honestly, if that was being generous, I'd probably give it like 3. Please don't get offended if this is one of your favourites in the series, but I can't do it. Now, the next book, I must have been having a terrible reading month here. The next book was kind of a disappointment for me. I was really excited to read this book. That is The Summer I Turned Pretty by Jenny Han. Now, I've watched the TV show for this. I love the TV show. I had such high expectations going into this book. It's basically about Belly, who like goes to this summer. She goes to a summer house in Cousins. Her and her family stay with her mum's best friend's family as well. There's 2 brothers, love triangle, those are the vibes. I hate this book. Belly annoyed me so much in this book, and I love Belly in the TV show. Hated her here. All the characters were so whiny and annoying, and I just like couldn't get into it. Like, I finished the book. Honestly, I was thinking about DNFing it at the time, because after reading this book, I needed a good read, and this was not doing it for me. I never continued on the rest of the series. Maybe I will one day, but honestly, after this one, I was just kind of like, no. I gave it 3 stars. I probably, again, would say that was generous. I'd probably give it like 2.5. I just didn't like it that much. Okay, next up we have The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren. Essentially, Olive and Ethan, that's his name. I'm always terrible. You'll always catch me sitting reading the blurb because I can always just never remember their names. But Olive and Ethan go to a wedding. It's Olive's sister, I believe, and I think it's Ethan's brother, if I remember correctly. But they go to their wedding. Everyone eats the shrimp, I believe, but these 2 don't. Everyone gets food poisoning. These 2 don't. They go on their brother and sister. That sounds weird, but her sister, his brother. They go on their honeymoon instead of them because, you know, why not? And they kind of hate each other, these 2. Like, I think Olive, if I remember correctly, she thought Ethan just hated her, so she didn't like him back because of that. And obviously it's a wee bit of an enemies to lovers. It is a romance book, so we can imagine where this heads, the direction this takes. I loved this couple. I think I gave it 3.5 stars. I would say that's about right. It's a pretty good fun book. I would totally recommend it, and it was really enjoyable. Okay, next up is another Emily Henry book. Honestly, the amount of Emily Henry books I read last year, impressive. This is You and Me on Vacation. I think in America it's called People We Meet on Vacation. I don't know why it has 2 titles. They're 2 friends who meet, and it kind of shows us their progression, like year by year. They start going on like trips together, and they have some kind of conflict on this certain summer, and then they go on one kind of last trip together, and it's an Emily Henry book, so it's a romance. That's not a spoiler, but it kind of shows how their relationship progressed. We get to kind of learn about their past, how their relationship had been before these events took place. This one, I have so many quotes saved in my phone because I read this at the very end of summer, and it had so many lines which just resonated with me at the time, because I don't know, I just found it very relatable to the situation I was in at the time, and I just think this book has like a special place in my heart. I love it so much. I gave it 3.75 stars, which I feel like is about right. I don't know why I didn't just give it 4, like I was being very specific with the 3.75, but it was such a fun little book. Okay, the next 2 books I'm just going to do in one because I read them one after the other. This was where my reading really started to go downhill, of like slowing down. I wasn't reading as much, which is nothing against the books I was reading. It was just because I started university. But the next books are Dance of Thieves and Vow of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson. These, honestly, I love these. This was, I think, the first fantasy book I had read since ACOTAR. It was like before that I had only read ACOTAR, that was my only experience of fantasy. This is also a fantasy romance, but it has no spice, so if you're someone who doesn't like reading that and that's like a reason you don't read ACOTAR or other fantasy novels, this is one I would totally recommend for you. It's very, very PG, but it's such a beautiful book, I think. Okay, so essentially this story is following Cassie, who is a member of the Queen's Guard. She was essentially, before this, she was like a thief, and like she lived on the streets, and then she got brought in and trained up and worked for the Queen. She gets sent to Tor's Watch, which is where we meet Jace. Kind of like the leader there. I believe at the start of this story his dad just passed away, so he's kind of coming into his role. It's very will they won't they. I feel like it's kind of, they have opposite goals from each other, and so they don't make sense in that aspect of things. However, you know, they're spending so much time together, and you know, feelings grow. And then obviously that carries over into the second book here, which I can't really go into the plot too much because it spoils the plot of this one. But overall the series it's so beautiful. I love it so much. It's quite an easy fantasy as well. Like, it's not too confusing, I don't think. If you're wanting to get into fantasy and you're not wanting, you know, like one with spice like ACOTAR, this is one I would definitely recommend for you. Okay, the next book I read, I remember being so excited to read this book, is The XX. I just waited and waited and waited until it got around to Halloween so that I could read this book. All I wanted was the awesome vibes with this book. And honestly, like, it's also a really easy read. Like, I don't know if you can really see, but like the printing in this is not too small, and it's only about like 300-ish pages. Yeah, 300 pages. It's really fun. It's just like a cute little autumnal witchy story, a little romance, and I gave it 3.5 stars. It was just perfect for the time. I loved it. I totally recommend, especially if you're looking for a book around like October time. This would be the one I would recommend for you. Okay, I'm gonna do these next few books in one go because they are part of a series. But after this, I went on to the Throne of Glass series. I've only gotten up to Queen of Shadows so far. I'm currently doing the tandem read, which it's an experience. It's definitely quite difficult. I'm loving the 2 books though, I have to say. I'm really enjoying it, and I'm hoping to finish them this week. I think I can definitely finish the tandem read in the next week, and hopefully I can finish the series in the next 2 weeks, because I have nothing to do for the next 2 weeks, so I'll be reading. But this series, I honestly have to say I do prefer it over ACOTAR. It's beautiful. I love Selena. She's our main girl in this series. She is everything to me. She's such a fun character to read about, and you really, really root for her. She has her flaws, obviously, as every good main character does. We'll defend her to the end. I really, really will. Essentially, Selena is an assassin, and the way the first kind of book starts out, she gets brought in to this kind of competition, which it's to kind of fight to be the king's champion. And it's a bunch of assassins, like prisoners, everyone kind of gets brought in. She had been a slave at this point, which we kind of find out in the prequel, which I did read the Assassin's Blade first. But anyway, she wins her freedom if she wins the competition. So that's kind of how the first book starts off, and you know, things definitely develop from there. This series has so many twists and turns, and the directions that take it's beautiful. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. I've not finished it yet, and honestly I think when I do finish it I will be a little bit heartbroken, because I love these characters so much, and I can't imagine just like not reading about them again, which is so sad. Overall, you know, I have individual ratings for all the books obviously, but overall it is a 5-star series for me. Okay, I'm getting down to my last few books. The next one is The Midnight Library. This, honestly, I feel like some people have mixed opinions on this book. I gave it 5 stars. I thought this book was just breathtaking. It's essentially about this woman, Nora. She's kind of in a bad place in her life, right? She's just kind of not getting anywhere. And so she passes away. It does have some kind of morbid themes in it, I would say, so definitely look up some aspects of that, because you know, it might people might not like that. But she passes away and she ends up in the Midnight Library, where basically you can take a book and it's books of different choices you've made in your life and how your life would have developed on from there. So we get to see her like live all these different experiences. I think I read this just around Christmas time. It was such like a cozy book. It just, I loved it. I loved it. Honestly, this is a book I genuinely recommended to people in real life. Like, obviously I'm recommending it on here, but in my day-to-day life I've actually like said to people close to me, like, oh, if you're looking to get into reading, like, this is a really good book. It's pretty short, so it's not like too intimidating. It's like roughly just 300-ish pages, so it's nothing crazy, and it's a gorgeous book. I love it. Okay, I'm coming to my last book. I'm quickly gonna throw in, I did read another book this year, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I read that this year for uni because I'm doing reading as one of my modules. Imagine that. But I gave it like 4 stars, I think. It was really good. I read it in like a day, which says a lot about my uni work. But it was pretty good. I don't have the physical copy, I read it online, but I just want to throw that one out there quickly before I move on. Okay, so finally we have The House Across the Lake. This is by Riley Sager. It's kind of a thriller mystery. It's about this woman who is an actress. She's kind of disgraced at this point, I guess. She's living at this house on a lake, as you can imagine, and she sits with her binoculars and she watches the house across the lake. Ding ding ding. But she sees some strange events happening and she gets like extremely invested in what's going on. She kind of tries to figure it out herself, and it is really interesting. I think I remember at the time I kind of struggled to get into it. However, once I did get into it, like the last kind of 100 pages, it was very gripping. Like I did very much enjoy the book. I think I had anticipated I would enjoy this book a bit more, which I feel like sometimes if I think I'm going to really enjoy a book, it only leads me to disappointment. So I need to kind of stop doing that. But overall, I think I gave it 3.5 stars. It was a good book. I did enjoy it. I didn't see the plot twist coming. Like, I feel like that kind of came a bit out of left field. But it was pretty good. Okay, so if you've stuck around for that entire video, because I feel like it's probably going to be my longest one I've ever made, well done. Congratulations, very impressed. But those were the 34 books that I've read since last April, or I guess the end of last March, because this is the last day of March today. I had some great reads. I didn't have many bad reads. Actually, I don't think I had any bad reads. I just had some I didn't love. But hopefully this next year I can read even more books, and hopefully I can keep up the kind of high quality of books. I really want to get back into making more book videos, so hopefully this won't be like the last video I make for a long time. Fingers crossed. I hope you enjoyed. Hopefully you find some books here that you kind of want to try out for yourself. Maybe you're just starting your reading journey, maybe you've been reading longer than me, I don't know, but hopefully there's something here that you haven't heard of before or you haven't read before, and it's kind of inspired you to go on and read it yourself.